Hi, everybody. Today I have with me best-selling author Dan Groat. And Dan has been with me before, but we were on audio, so this is our first time doing a video. And today we're going to talk about this book, An Enigmatic Escape. I did it. Did I do it?
Perfect.
All right. Yes. And I looked the word up because with you, I always have to look words up because you always have a meaning behind your words. And it's mysterious. And you know what? I wait till I'm done with the books to look this stuff up because I want to then relate to it. But there are just so many reasons why we have to talk about this book today. So, how are you?
Looking forward to it.
Good. So, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and like we discussed, I will explain to your viewers the shades. I'm not hiding, and I'm not blind, but I do wear them for an eye problem, and I wear them all the time. So this is the real me.
That's you. That's awesome. So, as with your books, I should say, in the beginning, I always get, okay, this is how I read a lot of books, right? So I always say, I'm going to read a chapter, and then I'm going to go do something. I can never do that with your books. I get sucked in, I can't get up, and before I know it, I'm halfway through the book, and, and I'm like, because I have to know what happens. And at the end of this book, I was actually like reading as fast as I could to find out how it, because I was like, I can't take it. I can't take the buildup. I know there's something awesome going on here, and I just have to find out. But I want to read to everybody, because of course when you first start a book, you kind of just go through and you get to the first page. But when I went back to look at this, and I was like, oh my gosh, listen to all these amazing things that people say about your books. Like, beautiful, a journey you won't ever forget. The characters are unforgettable. Mesmerizing novel. I mean, you do books like nobody else. I know.
Thank you.
That's all I can say. So
I'm never tired of hearing that.
Well, that's good because I'll just keep telling you that. And I can't wait to tell. Okay, so I'm starting to read the book, and there's Ernie. And I'm like, wow, this guy is, I couldn't figure him out. I'm like, this guy's crazy, but not crazy. But the way that his narrative is, like, you're in his head, you're listening to his thoughts. There's not much going around, But I'm like, okay, well, I don't know exactly who he is yet, because then you go right into Mac. And what I love about Mac's story is that it is not told by Mac. Like, Ernie's in his head. And then Mac's narrative is through Sam, this guy, who's just in his life. I mean, how amazing is it? So you don't know it. You don't know. You don't see it coming. You don't, I'm thinking this is all about Sam. And I'm, reading into Sam's life. And until you get to the end and you're like, oh my God, this is all about Mac. And then about that, like, Sam's dog's name was Buttons. My dog growing up was Buttons.
Oh, wow.
I know. And when I read that, I was like, I started to cry because I'm like, who names their dog Buttons? We named our dog Buttons because when we got him as a puppy, he'd always chew on our buttons in our shirts. It was back in the 70s. We had a lot of those big fancy buttons, and so I was like, oh my gosh, how did he come up with that?
We picked up a dog that we had waited for, and we already had him named. But on the way home, driving with the dog on my wife's lap, she said if we hadn't already named him, we could name him Buttons because he's chewing on the buttons on my blouse. So that's kind of where a dog's name that we did not use ended up in a book.
And for the same reason. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, exactly.
Because he would always chew. We didn't, and remember I was little, but we had him for like maybe a couple days because we couldn't name him. And then that's what my mom named him because he loved chewing on our big buttons on our shirts.
Sure.
So,
Makes
and then
sense.
we had other dogs and we named them all Buttons. Like there was Buttons Jr. and then there was Buttons the Third. Because they were all black Cocker Spaniels. Now, this is a beagle. This is not a Cocker Spaniel. When I saw that, because you didn't say what kind of dog it was, and when you finally said it was a beagle, I was like, oh, okay, well, close. But and then we'll get back to Mac. But then we get to Jack's story, and Jack's story is just amazing. I mean, I fell in love. Mac and Jack, I fell in love with. I mean, Ernie was tough because I couldn't figure Ernie out, like to fall in love with. But I don't know that you wanted me to. I don't know that you wanted
Ernie
me to
is
fall.
not lovable at all.
Okay.
No.
Okay. See, I'm always reading in. That's another thing with you. It's like, so I read really quick at the end because I wanted to see what happened, but I was like, I got to go back those 5 pages because you do not mince words. Everything that you say, I know that there's a meaning to, and I know I have to read it. But even when I'm reading as fast as I can, I got to go back and I got to figure it out.
I have, I told you before, every author gets responses on their books. They get reviews, they get messages, and a super fan of my first book who had corresponded with me. And as a matter of fact, talking about dogs, one day he sent me an email saying how much he liked my first book, Paymaster.
Uh-huh.
And in my email back, I said, what a fortuitous time for your message, because my wife and I just went through the passing of our dear dog yesterday. And so he offered some advice, his opinions, his feelings about dogs, a book that he had read once that really placed a lot of things in perspective. And then after we passed some more messages and we got through the grieving that we were sharing about losing such close friends, he said, I almost gave up on your second book, Escape, that we're talking about now. He said, I could not find anything I wanted to like in your opening character. And I said, yeah, I knew that was a big risk on my part. It was intentional, but also, you're writing a book, you're trying to hook people and you're trying to keep them going. And I ran the risk, and it did come to be a fact for some people that they said, I hate this guy, I quit. And, okay, I'm sorry about that, but I accept that because that was the risk I took. And that was the youngest brother, and that was the story I was telling about him. And it was, like you say, it was stream of consciousness. There was very little description, very little setting, hardly any other characters. It was his mind, and that was where the book is called a trilogy. And people also say, I even had editors say, you can't call this a trilogy. It's not a series of 3 books. And I said, yeah, I know that's the traditional thing, but it's a series of 3 stories, 3 brothers, 3 escapes. And Ernie had escaped into his own mind for psychotic reasons and coping reasons.
I was just going to say coping reasons.
A lot of things. But that was tough to write. And like I said, I knew it was a tough sell, and I got very few comments back saying, boy, Ernie sold me on this book, because he is difficult to walk around with. So yeah, I get your impression too.
Was it hard to write his mind? Like, I kept thinking about you writing it, and like, in order for us to see, because you will find out at the end of the book, because then eventually, you find out what his deal is. But I didn't know you were gonna, I didn't know it was all gonna wrap up tidy. I was like thinking the same thing. I was like, okay, so that's a strange place to start. But as I'm reading it, I mean, you almost feel the psychoticness, with the repetition and I was like, I wonder how hard that is to write like that.
Stream of consciousness, is not very hard to write. It wasn't for me. I don't think it would be for anybody, uh, because you're just rambling whatever's bouncing around in your head. Of course, if you're writing it through someone else's head, uh, you're trying to match your thoughts with whatever character you've created. But I did research on the characteristics of the type of personality and the mental aspects of the things that he was dealing with, and I did try to display the things that were characteristic of a person with those problems. So the repetition, the paranoia, the bouncing back and forth from present to past, the misconceptions that as you're reading you may get, you may not, because it's coming from him, and you want to believe that it's true, and some of it is, and some of it's just his faulty perception of what's happening to him.
Yeah, and okay, so when I get to the next chapter and we're on Sam, I'm like, what is the connection between Sam and Ernie? But then I was like, okay, because I knew that it was, I read the back of the book. I knew that it was going to be, but I couldn't figure out, what the deal was with Sam until the end. And then I was like, oh my God, this guy is a freaking genius. Like, the way you wrote it into there, like, it like snuck up on you. And you're like, this isn't about Sam. Not really. This is about, this is about Mac and his story. And then what blew me away is when you turn the page and Billy, I hope I'm not revealing, because I hate when I reveal endings. I don't want to do that. But I was like, wait a second. So there was, like, he wasn't there, and so Mac is kind of crazy in his own sense.
Yeah, even though his escape was, and again, partly because of his wartime experiences, but his escape was into solitude, but a certain amount of that also means that you have crawled into your own mind for protection. I mean, he had other outlets, his wood carving and his dog and the outdoors and things that he loved, but his was an escape too, not the devious, confusing escape of Ernie, but his own running from the past, his own running to comfort, to safety. And that part, the second story, well, to nail these all down, I wrote these three stories at different times. I wanted to write something stream of consciousness, and that came out Ernie's story. Mm-hmm. I wanted to write something about retirement because at that time I was making a final retirement, even though I jumped from teaching secondary to teaching college, and I had done other consulting things in between. At the time I was writing Mac's story, I was retiring from my college teaching. So Sam was a little autobiographical. He went looking for future meaning in his retirement, but he found this remarkable character in the woods, and like you say, and I had this very question from other people. Okay, Billy, now what's the story behind Billy, without giving anything away? And my answer is, well, there's two very good possibilities for what was going on with Billy, and there's a third not as solid. And people say, well, which was he? And I said, well, I know which he was for me, but that doesn't matter, right? Because you're the reader. which Billy was, which character, which scenario, what was going on with Billy is your interpretation, and that was the whole point.
Yeah, it gave me chills. Like I said, I turned the page and I was like, oh my God, okay. Like it just took that whole story to another level of, it was brilliant. It was brilliant.
And another autobiographical part of Mac's story is the setting in the woods for that story is fictionalized, but a haphazard account of a place that my family went when my siblings and I were teenagers and younger. I have two brothers and a sister, and they're all older than I am. But it was a place we went with our family to camp. It happened to be a homestead location of the birth of my maternal grandfather, and my brothers especially said that particular story, that novella about Mac, is the favorite thing that I've read of yours out of all your books and everything you've written, because it was so much set in a place that we were familiar with. So
I figured you had to be very familiar, with that setting. I was like, he must, because it was so detailed, and I felt like I was there, in the, like
right,
it was just so much
right.
detail in that, and I loved Sam. I mean, even because the story was about him, sort of, but I fell in love with him, and then in return, and the connection between men, like of that age, of that time. I could really feel like my dad, who's passed away, but I was like, that's exactly how they kind of talk, like I really felt that. So
and that's important to me. That was in the book. That's important to me personally. When two people connect in those magic ways, especially two older men, it's a special thing, and it has its own background music. It's a dance that you don't see often.
No, and my dad did not go to Vietnam. He was of the right age, but at the time I was born, and then they did another round of draft, and then my brother was born. Like first it was one child, and then I guess at some point, or that's the story he gave me anyway, is that at some point then it became, if you had two children, you were exempt from going. And he lost a lot of friends, and I know he went through that guilt, even though I know he did not want to go. He did not. He was not,
Absolutely.
he did not want to go. But he also, when they were coming back, and then when they weren't coming back, I know it hit him really, really hard. I do remember.
Yeah, and that obviously we're looking at each other, and obviously I'm very much older than you are. I then am your father's age, because Vietnam was my generation's war. My small town buried 3 or 4 guys in my graduating class and the years behind and beyond me. And I mean, it's not fair to say, since I did not go, that I have survivor's guilt, but it is something akin to that, because that was my generation falling, coming back. I have a friend, an acquaintance who came back with no legs and no eyes.
Right.
So that was my generation's encounter with the nonsense that comes out of war, even if in that case I don't think it was for a very decent reason, but there are wars that have been, but they're all nonsense for what they do to minds and bodies and psyches. So
what prevented you from going?
I'm blind in one eye.
Oh, right.
Actually, so I tried to enlist, and
they won't.
Had I been thinking far enough ahead, I would have tried to fake the eye test, because when they covered one eye and said read the chart, I gave the honest answer. I don't see anything. So I was given a deferment. Of course, had I not been given that, I would have been playing the ridiculous lottery game that was played by college students
Right.
back then, waiting to see what number they would be and all of those things. So, it's sadly every generation, almost, it would be a rare generation that doesn't have their war that took their young people as part of their life, and that just happened to be mine. So it's very personal.
Yeah, I have a brother who is deaf in one ear, and that kept him. He wouldn't have been drafted, but he wanted to enlist, and they would, he couldn't fake his way through it
Yeah, I said to the whoever it was, a doctor or whoever was there with this mile-long line of potential recruits running these tests. I said to him when he said, "You will not be acceptable to any branch of the service with that poor vision." He said, "What is your vision?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, that's legally blind in one eye." And I said, I'm aware of that." I said, "You send boys back home with no eyes. Why don't you send one over that has one?" And he gave an answer that did make sense to me. He said, "The guy on your right, where you're blind,
Right.
needs to be able to depend on you."
Yeah, and that's the thing they said to my
That
brother
makes
too,
sense.
because he can't hear anything on one side. It makes sense. But I have
Yeah.
my oldest son went in the Marine Corps, and he was asthmatic, but he hit it, and he actually survived boot camp. He figured if he could survive boot camp, and and he kind of got over it a little bit. But I remember, I tried to talk him out of it, and he was like, "No, I'm going," and he got away with it, and and dealt with it. But I do understand that, and but the thing is that, like, I think the reason my dad felt so guilty was because I don't know that, he didn't want to go. Like, he didn't, and then it was like, I was born in 64. So it was really at a time, like, he did not want to go. But then when they started coming back, I think he realized, like, his decision to not want to go, then he felt bad about it because of the people, that Vietnam was so much worse because people had, like, real feelings about, they wanted to protect the country, but then for what? And there were so many political things that were going on with that, and
Exactly.
that's why in that chapter, like, you felt that between those two men because. And Mac was, like, good about, he was like, "Don't feel bad that you didn't go and I went." Like, it was
Well,
really,
that was
it was heartwarming.
again, that was autobiographical. That was my conversation with Mac, saying I didn't go. I didn't tell the whole story. The autobiographical part is I was a freshman at the University of Missouri in 1965. Especially in 66 and most strongly in 67, the protests on campus against the war were at an all-time high. And I, not completely by choice, but I wasn't really opposed. I was involved in a couple marches against the war on campus. And the reason I was in the first one was that a very strong opponent of the war that was a professor said, "I'm taking roll tomorrow at the corner of Broadway and blah blah Street during this class time. You show up and be in the march. If you're not there, you're absent from class." And that was at a time when absences in a college class were a big deal.
Right.
So I went to the first one just because I thought I had to. The second march I was in, I chose to be in it. And then I started getting news from home that so and so was killed in Vietnam. I grew up with him. I
Mm-hmm.
played Little League Baseball with him.
Right.
And then, as your dad did, I thought, no, this is not right. I need to be a part of that craziness, and then they said, no, you can't do that. So I don't regret it.
Right.
I'm in one piece, and I'm not dealing with the things that those boys and men dealt with. But
Mm-hmm.
but that's my story.
And it's interesting because
Uh,
now those vets are, you know how we went through the World War II vets getting to that age of, that they started, that people were starting to document, and now there's probably not very many left, but now the Vietnam War vets that
exactly.
have coming back and they're hitting their 70s, and,
Right. Right.
and it was, it's a great time for, okay, we got to move on. We got to move on to Jack.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I said before, uh, off air, how easy you are to talk to. So I love talking about my books, but just the conversation is fun too.
I know it is so much fun because I just and they bring up so much in it, and so I start reading. I get done, with my emotionalness from Mac, okay, and then I get into Jack, and Jack isn't that we start over, and it isn't that emotional to start off with, but I have to tell you that I was raised in a pool hall. And so it was now, my dad taught it. Me and my brother learned how to play pool when we were playing pool like this. And what he would do was he would bet everybody and he would win money off of us. He'd say, "How about you play my kids?" And and then he'd win money. And my brother and I eventually he afforded to have a pool table at home, and my brother and I are very good pool players, and we go, he's the only person who can beat me that I know of, so.
Oh, you're on. The next time we get together, we'll shoot.
But I only shoot 8-ball, that's the thing, so I was
Oh
reading the
well,
9-ball.
I'll shoot 8 ball.
You
My
will?
game's my game is 9 ball, but
Well,
I'll shoot 8 ball.
we did have a 9-ball rack, and I remember him teaching us 9-ball, but I guess since he wasn't really into it, but so one time I went with my uncle to a pool hall, and there was a guy we grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania, and there was a guy who owned a car dealer, and he said to the guy, "If my niece can beat you in pool, I get a car." And he was like, "Okay, right?" And so, and I'm only, you can't tell, but I'm only 5 foot. I am very small, okay? So I think I'm very, and I look young at that time. I was in my 20s, so I probably looked even younger. But he was like, "Okay," so I beat him very easily, and he was like, "I can't give you a car."
Deals off.
I'm sorry, but I really don't have the, I can't really do that, but, So anyway, so then I was like, okay, I can relate to all the pool, and the way that, the talk, like when you read about, well, I love pool movies, Jackie Gleason and
Yeah.
like I love Paul Newman, and I love those pool movies, but so I really related to that, except for the fact that I'm not really big on 9-ball. I don't know. I don't know what it is about it. It's so specific because you have to do the balls in order, and you have to, it's a very
Right.
specific game,
Yes, right. And pool's very close to me. Yesterday, as I do every Tuesday, I meet a friend uh, that I've had since we were each 10 years old. So that's a 60-year friend.
Uh-huh.
And we shoot pool every Tuesday. We shoot 9-ball for 3 or 4
That's
hours.
awesome.
And then we have lunch. So and in my early 20s, I managed a pool hall. So that is very much something I know. Not as a great pool shooter, but I've been around it a lot, and it as you know, it has its own language. It has its own wonderful characters. Whether you enjoy the game or not, hanging around those places is an education.
That's right. So I'm relating because, like I said, I'm in a small town. Our pool hall, we had a couple of them, but you had to be members. So my dad would be a member to a couple of them, but they were all very small. And at that point, nobody cared about drinking age, or especially in our small town. We even knew the cops, so it wasn't that big a deal. But they'd let kids in, and so we
Right.
were always allowed into the and play with the men. And I don't remember any women playing, but I think I was one of the only ones. But so I really related to that close knit because you knew every pool hall, and then you knew who was going to be at every one. So my brother and I would be, and as we grew older, that's what we would, when we did get together in our hometown, him and I would be like, all right, well, let's start at this one, and then let's go to this one, and then let's go, we did not bet money. We never did. But I mean, it was just like, it was so crazy because I'm like, there's a reason I know this man because there are so many crazy, things about
Isn't that
us.
something? Yeah, the connections that you find, that's happened before with me, and one part of it makes me feel good that I'm writing some universal feelings, places, things, characters, and that's the idea, is to connect. So, that's great to hear.
Yeah, and it's crazy how pool is one of those games that really gets into your head because my oldest son, who was a Marine, he would come home from leave and say, Mom, I can beat everybody. I am going to beat you. Let's go. And I'd say, okay, rack them up, let's do this. And then he'd lose and he'd be like, oh my God, I can't beat you. I'm like, because you think too much. You got to get it, because he wanted to so bad. And he's going to be watching this because he edits my videos. So unfortunately, he has never beat me in a game of pool. But he would probably die trying. Every time we get together, he would want to do that. So it was just funny because he'd say, "But I beat everybody. But I beat." And it's not that he's not good. It's just that I get it's right here.
Yeah. It's very much a psychological game too. The travelers that come in and shoot the game for the big money in that story. Was a fairly common thing in the pool hall where I worked. 2 or 3 guys would come in, and most of the time they would not mess around and try to set somebody up. They just walk up to the counter and say to me, who's the best around here that's got some money? And you get if they weren't in there, you get on the phone, and in our case, it happened to be a 17-year-old high school kid who was the best around.
Wow.
No joke about it. He was absolutely nails on a pool table, but he had no money. So we put guys together, and every guy had put in 10 or 20 bucks. And we called this 17-year-old kid who lived about 15 miles away and said, we've got you a game, we've got your backing, come on down. And the shooter who had come in with the 1 or 2 other guys who were his protection and or his money man, and they just traveled around the country doing this, and they stopping into this small town pool hall, even though it had 12, 14, 15 tables, I don't remember now, but you knew that they probably were off their route or they weren't top notch, because they would have gone on to St. Louis and hit some places where there was really big money. We used to get a phone call too from a place called Grand and Olive, a pool hall in St. Louis. And the phone would ring, and I would pick it up in the pool hall and say hello, and they'd say, Fats is in the house, and hang up. And that was the message that Minnesota Fats, who lived at that time in southern Illinois, just a few miles from St. Louis, was in their pool hall shooting. And all of a sudden, 3 or 4 carloads of guys would fill up, and they'd drive the 30, 35 miles to downtown St. Louis and sit around and watch Minnesota Fats shoot pool.
Wow, that is so cool. So
Yeah.
that's so easy, you know, like I can see now how easy that was to write. And I loved the, you know, because I didn't experience the gambling that was involved. It was really cool for me to see, you know, like what happened with that and, you know, how they would set it up. And, you know, I loved, so that part of the book, it was like really cool to me. But so another thing that I found interesting is that he's the one, so he's the oldest of the brothers, but he's the
Right.
one that actually has it kind of together in a way. Like, I mean, I feel like he succeeded a little bit. He, well, he succeeded a lot eventually. And that's the, you know, I was like, so mentally, did he go to war? Did he end up going to war? Like
No.
back to, okay, so he was too old. He got out of having to go. And then he was the one that was the most together. And, you know, his story is, like I said, I'm at the end of the book. I don't want to give it away, but I'm like, I know Dan is going to finish this off good, so I have to get to the end.
Well, again, going back to the part of the title, The Escape.
Yes.
Again, Ernie escaped into his mind. Mac escaped into solitude. And Jack escaped into people, into friendship. So he was maybe the soundest psychologically, or at least he allowed himself, maybe because he wasn't carrying some of the baggage that the other two brothers were, he allowed himself to get involved with people, and that was his escape. Even after his wife died,
right.
The pool hall and the people in it were his family. That was his escape.
Yeah, and you know, like I've told you, I have 6 children. My oldest is a boy, is a son, my son, and there is. I'm glad you picked him to be the one that was kind of the one that kind of understood what he had to do to survive. His, you know, because I can see, you know, and my other children who are watching this, but my oldest son, like he is the one that would figure something out. Like he would figure whatever it would have to be. I know he would figure stuff out. And so I was really happy when I figured out that he was the oldest and what he ends up doing for the town and for the people and for, you know, it was awesome. It was a great way to end this book. And, you know, I fell in love with him and what's the reporter's name? I wrote it down and I forget. What was the report? They nicknamed him Cubby, but I was like, what was his first name?
Yeah, No Fair.
No Fair.
Cubby's all that comes to mind. I wrote this. I'm supposed to. Nothing's coming to me.
I know because they
right
put you
now.
calling Cubby like the whole time. But
I had the book upstairs, but I came downstairs.
Maybe if I get to the beginning.
So, but again, that is the protagonist is not the person telling the story. Even though it's in first person.
Exactly. So
Ernie was telling the story, but it was convoluted because he was confused. The other two have their stories told by someone else.
And that is just, I mean, Dan, that is why I read your books, okay? Because that is just genius, and I love that. And like I said, I know when I open one up, I'm like, you never disappoint me. And you know, when I first started it, I was like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read a chapter, I'm going to go do some laundry, and then, you know, an hour later, I'm like, oh, crap, I'm already, you know, into this book. You get me every time.
To tell you earlier that I wrote that first story. At a different time, I wrote the second story. At a different time, I wrote the third story. And they were all 3 separate stories, actually sitting around when I published my first book, Paymaster. Oh. And I decided, hey, those are not 3 stories. Those are 3 brothers.
Oh,
one story.
Then you connected them?
Yeah, then I connected them. I changed their names. I interweaved their backgrounds enough that you could tell they had grown up together, and it became one book rather than 3 unrelated stories.
Oh, that's amazing. And I saw, because I did see that at the beginning of each one that you call Ernie a short story, and the other two a novella. And I wanted to know, what is the difference between a short story and a novella?
Length.
Length. Okay.
There are all kinds of barriers that are put out there, but short stories fall, 5,000 words or less, or some people say 7,500 or 10,000 or whatever. And a novella goes beyond a short story to 40 or 50,000 words, but not novel length, which is 60,000 or beyond, and I'm quoting my own numbers because everybody has their own numbers for those things. Short stories, if you include flash fiction, can go every length from 3 or 4 words to thousands of words, but you get beyond short story lengths, but not novel lengths, then you're in novella or novelette. They even break novellas into another category based on words, and those were the most common definitions. Like I said, I never found one definition of word length for novella. I found 50, but I decided, okay, they're not novels,
right?
They're not that length, and they don't involve all of the pieces that a novel would, but they do qualify as novellas, and the first one is actually too short for a novella.
Right. What is your favorite? Would you rather write a novel or?
Oh, I'd really rather write a novel, but that's only a smidgen of a difference between the others. Short stories are fun. I think they're harder. Flash fiction is fun. I think it's the hardest. You can, if you don't lose your reader, as the author, you can wander around a little bit in a novel, and you can definitely talk about theme or themes and make it as hidden as you want it to be. But the shorter you get, the more difficult it becomes to work in all those other pieces. And you get down there. I felt that when I got down to flash fiction, I was down to almost nothing but plot. Very little description, very little setting, just tell what happened and move on. And I, as you can tell from our conversations, I tend to ramble and wander, and that is my preferred type of writing. I want to dig into a character, and people have said, well, especially Monarchs that you have also read, people said, you call that a mystery, and it has mystery in it, but it's a lot different. It's a bigger character study than the typical so-called mystery formula, which is mostly plot, and I'm not criticizing that because I'm not capable, but I like to call my mysteries literary mysteries because I like to dig deeply into character. I want there to be plot there that people care about, but that's the most fun, being able to ramble, wander, dig deep, and still not be finished with the story.
Yeah, and you do that very well, because I always get so involved in your characters, and I love it. And so how far you were working on the sequel to Monarchs? How's that going?
It's actually, first draft is finished.
Yes.
I have lots of notes that I've made. It has been sitting for months, basically finished. I picked it up 2 times and done some editing, very little rewriting, but in the time off from that I wasn't writing other things, I've made notes of things I wanted to change or add or delete. And so I'll go back and begin to do very shortly some more rewrites for that. And then it could be ready in summer, but since fall, in my opinion, is a better time to publish, I'll probably wait and try to have it ready by October.
Awesome. Well, then I'm so glad that we're going to do another video on Cultural Paymaster.
Oh,
I'm
you
so
bet.
excited.
You bet.
I'm so happy that
I
you
love it. I really do. If no one else was going to see this, I would be fine with it because I enjoy the conversation that much. It's nice that we can see each other, but
yes.
just talking is you are so easy to talk to, and golly, you support me, and I'm sure you support other authors. It's fantastic what you're doing.
Well, I love doing it, and that's what I always think of. I just like to do it. Whatever. If anybody watches it, they watch it. If not, we have a great conversation. I love reading the books, so I want to show everybody your book one more time. I love that you put the bird in the window like that. That was so nice.
I do my own covers, so
it's so
I
good.
did purchase the picture, but I
you picked
I
it
do
out.
my own covers. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great story. Everybody, please read this book. You will not be disappointed. But anyway, Dan, until we talk again, because now I know I'll get to talk to you again. I don't have to say goodbye.
I'm looking forward to it. My pleasure. I
Okay.
love doing this. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.